Recording. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us or not joining us this evening, and those who are actually watching the recording, I hope you actually enjoy this topic. I think it's going to be a multitude of topics because I have none other than John Templeton on this evening to actually ask a multitude of questions, and I really do love John's questions, and he goes deep and far and wide, and they are beautiful for actually expanding consciousness and also expanding your own personal development too as well. So let's go, John. Like, what's your first question?
All right, we'll start with the one I sort of presented to you last night, which was if your values are essentially things you perceive are going to give you more benefit than drawbacks, isn't that the same definition as an infatuation or a fantasy? What's the core difference if there even is one? If your values are illusions, more benefit than drawback, what's the difference between following your highest values and chasing fantasies?
Okay, so if I get you correctly, like just to simplify the question is that you're looking for the difference between a fantasy and a core value, or a axiological value, or a teleological mission.
Yep, all of those.
All of those. All right. Well, I think to actually, let's just say if you have a fantasy, and this really relates to not just values, but really a teleological mission. So a fantasy is something that you have not taken the time to actually plan out and to chunk down in step-by-step processes and objectify it. If it's not done in that format, it's a fantasy. And so if you have a value that is actually congruently linked to what your teleological mission is, then the value will actually be driven by a void. And if you have the undeniable, authentic attachment to your teleological mission, it is not a fantasy if you have chunked out and objectified each step by step to actually reach that mission. But if you don't take the time to actually do those particular things, it's just a fantasy.
So essentially they're the same thing, but one of them you take care of and you kind of get serious about it and you strategically map it out to it essentially goes from a fantasy to a realistic thing, but they're born from the same thing. They're born from a wound and it becomes a value.
No. I wouldn't say that they're born from a wound. Like, to me, like a wound is not the same as a void.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah. So we come into semantics here. And the semantical aspect is like, if you want to get really nitty gritty and get really clear, this is also to objectify the actual components of the mission and really have the understanding of what the semantical, or let's just say the etymology of the words mean. So to me, if you're actually operating from a wound, it's more from a shame place. And therefore it's not the true essence of a teleological mission or an actual value. I would say that that's an injected value on somebody else. If it's a wound, it's coming from a place of shame.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It answers a part of the question for me. So it's like, if you have, so you're saying your teleological values are essentially values that are fixed in place, and do they not come from wounds?
No. Telos,
Where do they come from?
your telos is not actually a value. Your telos and your axiology. Your axiology is a study of values and worth, and your telos is a study of purpose and meaning. So it's to differentiate with that, like getting really clear on what your purpose and what your mission is your telos. That's your end in mind. That's your guiding light, your North Star, your direction, your overall direction. And so
Where does that come from?
where does it come from? Well, that is also a question that we could dive into. Are we predestined by our telos, or do we have free will to it? Now, that's a whole other in-depth teaching when it comes to that, because we have to go deep and wide in really understanding the true essence of telos and the true essence of axiology. And that's something that I do teach inside of my Intel Mastermind group, the actual components and the understanding of free will and predestination relative to our soul's direction and relative to our ontological aspect of the way that we're actually living our life, right? So that's a whole deeper teaching. That's something that I really can't unpack to that level, like in this short period.
Yeah, that's okay. We won't unpack that. So going back to the original question is like, if you're are your infatuations and your axiological values, not your telos, but your axiological values, are they from wounding?
No.
Void's values?
No, like I say, like if you have a wound, in my perception, and you're doing something that you think's of value and you're calling it a wound, it's coming from a place of shame.
Yes, I
And
understand.
so therefore it's an injected value. And it's an injected value that has been projected upon you from some hierarchical system or hierarchical parent, we would
Entity.
say, that you entity that have an expectation on you to actually live inside their values. So that there would actually potentially create like a shame or a wound. But if it's a true essence of your value, you will absolutely do everything you can to be able to action that relative to all the projected authorities like parents, etc. Does that make sense? So those that actually can stay in alignment with their values or their axiological values and pledge off the actual parents or projected authority saying you can't do this, you can't do that. That to me is the true essence of a void driving a value. And a void driving a value means that it's something that you really have attached to your mission, right? And it's the components that we just talked about before that you set about on a pathway to be able to complete or complete your mission. That makes
How
sense.
is a void not a wound?
Well, give me a construct of what you're actually calling a wound so that I can get some context around it.
So it's like you, okay, I guess the difference is like the difference between a wound, like a significant emotional event you might hear in the personal development space, versus conditioning of like, we were talking about Donald Trump earlier, and a property mogul, right? And is that like wounding, or did he just grow up because his dad was a property mogul? So he just kind of grew up and that was normal for him. So that's the question. I was like, well, is that like a wounding, or is that just his norm, if that makes sense?
What is
Is
norm? Like I would say, what is norm? And we could pull apart Donald Trump. Like I could pull that apart really and say that even in the essence of you saying that, his dad was a property mogul and then potentially he was expected to actually follow inside of that. So therefore he became a narcissistic, flipped the other way off the shame into self-righteous pride and then existed as he did now, right? So is that a true essence of his axiological and teleological mission? We don't know because we don't know who he is. But one of the things that inside the work that we do is to actually go and unpack that person and look at all the traits that they've exhibited and own them. And I've had the fortunate opportunity to actually do Donald Trump, back in coming up, I think 6-7 years ago as well. And, there's a lot of reference to that I can say that he isn't in authentic alignment with who he potentially could be.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And for someone who's so far out of alignment, this kind of goes on to another question, which is like,
So
can you?
when we see that person so far out of alignment, like with their true essence of who they attract all of these what we call pride humbling circumstances to actually bring hubris to them.
Yeah.
And so the universe is trying to bring them back to the center of really the essence of what their telos is. So, but also as you actually grow into your telos, you attract greater aspects of challenge to help you to grow. So we could speculate and say that he's got both, which he has, really. So, but unless we could get him on here or go and find some references, I know there's some old docos on him, in his teachings around property. But do you really believe that property is his highest value, or it's his telos or his mission?
No.
No. What do you believe it is?
Some kind of power.
Influence.
Yeah, like control and power of some kind. But yeah, I don't know.
See, that there is, I'd encourage you or invite you to go and look a little deeper into what that potentially is, and look beyond the property, see what you can come up with.
I
Cool. Next question.
It kind of leads on. I think I know what you're going to say now. Can you have a gigantic vision without a gigantic polarization?
What do you mean by a gigantic polarization? Like the
So,
opposing force, like the law of escalation?
yeah, kind of like a charge. So an example would be, well, we were talking about Hitler earlier, and like obviously had a massive impact and influence. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a few things here. It's like,
what's the question around that?
it's like the biggest, do you make more of an impact the more integrated you become, or do you make more of an impact the more polarized you become? Because I see people with massive wounds or polarizations that have a massive impact. And then from my understanding and going through some of your work and DeMartini's work is, well, the more integrated you become, the bigger your sphere of influence becomes. And that's just not what I have evidence has shown me to be true, but I might be missing something.
So have you watched The Greatest Story Never Told on Hitler?
No, but I get a gist. I know that what we're presented with is a half truth,
Absolutely.
but I don't know the full other half.
Okay. So again, when you only have a half truth, or you don't know like the full story, you haven't done enough research, you don't have enough data like to come to your conclusion that you've just made with the finite perception. So I would again encourage you to actually go deeper into looking at and finding more data into the purpose and mission of Hitler, and how he influenced and what he did to actually influence.
I've dived into it a little bit. Like I understand it, and I've gone through Mein Kampf, and I've understood his point of view and what a lot of positive things people had to say about him. But I still feel he was massively polarized, as in he wasn't in a state of equanimity in his decision making. A lot of it was coming from emotion, and so I'm like, that could be another misperception I have, but I feel like he made a big impact from a very polarized emotional place. Whether his intentions were different to what we're led to believe they are or not, I just want to have the correlation between the level of integration or lack of integration and the size of impact someone can make. And if there is a correlation, or maybe there's not.
Well, I guess because you did use the reference to Hitler, and you're actually saying that he came from an emotional polarized place. Again, like, where do you have the foundation of data to actually to reference that? Because when you go and research The Greatest Story Never Told, you see the law of risk escalation in place, like what we have been influenced to believe. There is also the opposing force there that actually shows like his mission and vision. And just like some of the greatest sages and philosophers on this planet, they are, you know, vehemently opposed when they come out with an idea that is relevant to their mission. And we could say this is where predestination comes in. Are they vehemently opposed from the minds of the masses that then end up, you know, burning them at the stake or putting them to death or taking them out, etc. But yet they become immortalized for us to continue on in asking these deeper questions, and they have contributed to the evolution of mankind in some form, right? So in the essence of that, the judgment or the emotion is, I would say, still has a purpose.
As in, if Hitler had an emotion, a judgment and emotion that serves a purpose towards his teleological mission?
Let's just take it even wider, that it serves a purpose to the evolution of mankind. Does that make sense? So we could say also too that we go back through time like Galileo, we could say Copernicus, and there are plenty of people that were burned at the stake for having their teleological mission vehemently opposed by fixed minds, let's just say. But yet their ideas have become immortalized and referenced throughout time. So they're still actually living inside of our minds through space and time. Does that make sense? So they're still having an affect and effect. So we could say that the emotion that you're talking about has contributed to the evolution of mankind. Is that right or wrong? So, or is it just a component of the law of risk escalation to actually contribute to the evolution of mankind?
Yes, and I see that, and I think we'd all agree that probably, yeah, that's the law of escalation, and that's what it's there for. I guess the other thing that I just want to challenge you on, it's not really challenging on, but it's a question that could put a spanner in the works if you don't have the right answer. Not the right answer, but an answer, which is...
If I didn't have John's correct answer, that we riff off on each other and challenge here in terms of philosophical constructs, because this is where we grow, and I love it. Absolutely, bring it.
So the more integrated you become, the more you see the hidden order. Would you say that statement is true?
I would propose to say that statement is true, yes.
Okay. Well, the more you see this hidden order, then, wouldn't the smaller your mission get because it's already perfect?
Yes.
So then the more integrated you become, the smaller your mission gets because you see the perfection in it all. So doesn't that mean Hitler and John DeMartini are unintegrated because they have big missions?
Well, let's put space and time in here and take the abstract components. We could say that the smaller your mission becomes is in the moment, right? And the more integrated you are, there really is nothing left to do. So therefore, in each evolutionary component, there is another opening of the void, or we say a quantum vacuum, right? We open up into the next stage of evolution, which is actually empty space. Does that make sense? So it may be becoming smaller, but it's becoming more condensed, right? So it's becoming greater in challenge to be able to achieve that.
Achieve what, though? Nothing needs to be achieved if everything's in divine order.
Exactly. And so this is the abstract component that the majority of the people that are actually listening to this will not actually be able to comprehend, to sit in the actual abstraction of that. When we actually look at it from that perspective, the synthesis and synchronicity of opposites, where we see all opposites and the hidden order is integrated, there is nothing to do in that moment. And this is where we go into the place of the eternal void, where there is nothing more to do. But the majority of the minds that are listening to this, they won't be able to comprehend that from that point, or to be able to be in it. Now, the Buddhists talk about it in a way that this is the place of where we stop suffering and we stop needing. This is the place of unattachment. And that we see all things are actually in order. And it's also the place of unconditionality. There isn't conditions there. It's a place of unconditional love, which you could say there's nothing more to do. So that is coming from our soul aspect or our higher mind and through the spirit component. But while we're here on earth, we're actually in the mind, and to have full consciousness. When I say full consciousness, I don't mean super consciousness, because to me, super consciousness is where everything is integrated, and that's where the hidden order is actually apparent. For us to be in this form, we have to be in the conscious, the unconscious, and the subconscious to animate this form. So this is what I love this question when it does come to me, and it does quite often, is to say, well, I'd rather be doing something, because the other part is being. And so while I'm in this form, what am I going to do? I can go sit on the beach every day and sit there and be, but, I know everything's in order, but we don't see it in every moment.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives us the opportunity in consciousness, subconscious, and unconscious to continue that process of integration, to actually reveal the hidden order in every given moment.
So if you know this and your mentor John knows this, I mean, that guy never stops. It's like he doesn't see the hidden order almost. It's like, no, I need to not change the world. I know that's not his perception of it, but for someone, and I'm not like, I love John's work. Obviously, it's helped me immensely. But I compare him to a mystic or someone who's really on the path of surrendering. And I feel like John's the opposite to surrendering to God. He talks about it, humility to divinity, right? But then I think that guy's in control of every second of his day. I don't think God's in control of every second of his day. And so I'm like, for someone with so much wisdom, why isn't he doing it?
What do you mean by God?
I mean that if everything is in divine order and nothing needs doing, and the more integrated you become, the more you realize that, and then you get into the place of, yes, you become indifferent, and then you surrender to maybe spirit, or in your teachings it's like higher self or something. Like the closer you get to God, spirit, the more you're heading towards at one-ment as opposed to duality and separation. The sort of closer you come to that precipice, I would feel like the less you would do and the less you would try and control things, because you understand that God, the universe, divinity has everything figured out. And so for a high consciousness being, or people that say they're high consciousness, I feel like you would actually do less and less and less the higher you get. And you kind of do see this with a lot of the mystics. They're pretty indifferent, non-judgmental, not too worried. And like now, people ask them questions and they give answers that are always paradoxical, and it's kind of like, all right, I got a heap out of that and I got nothing at the same time. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's
Well, isn't that the integration of the hidden order, that you got both at the same time? And so your mind is wanting to actually attach to one finite form in there here. So
I just want to pull DeMartini to pieces a little bit
yeah, I know.
because I feel like he's not practicing what he preaches. That's all. And it's
How
confusing me because
so
it's
inside of that, John, is to look at the traits that you're actually perceive that he's exhibiting, that you're in judgment of, is to really get specific on them and write them out and then own those traits, because that is also part of the integration of the hidden order, right? What you actually see in others, you have inside yourself. And whatever you're in judgment on, you haven't actually integrated either. So, you know, we're playing in the holograph, and we can also call this at all scales of existence, in all directions, at all vectors, there is opposing forces that are happening, which is part of the hidden order. And our human mind in its current form cannot conceptualize that. So there is work for us to continually do. And just the same as John is, he's on his mission, his teleological mission. And I just picked up on a component here that I want to bring in, is that when you say, if you know at all scales of existence that there is the hidden integration of the hidden order, that's indifference.
yes.
Yes, because you have, it's not taking the time to actually go and find in that specific moment the actual opposing force to that in that moment. So you're just in looking at it from a place of indifference. You haven't taken it into that space. You're in an I know and a prideful place.
Assumption.
Pardon?
It's like an assumption as opposed to an
Exactly.
experience.
Absolutely. So that's where full gnosis comes in, with the wisdom to actually do the work and to go into each moment that you're actually in a place of judgment, and then find it. And that's where we have the quantum collapse process happen. But if we're in that place of indifference and assumption, we're going to always be in a place of judgment, because we're actually still polarized in that format.
Mm.
And, you know, I've known John for, 17 years, and I've spent a lot of time with him, traveling around the world, facilitating, whatever, those particular things. And I can attest, that he has both sides of things too, as well, just as a human and as a spiritually evolved human. He continuously does do the work that he teaches in the integration of opposites. And as you actually rise up, there's more things to be able to actually integrate. So coming back to, this is where the abstract component is. As we actually get narrower, we also get wider. We have to have both of those things. And I believe that our mission is, as human beings, is to own all of the traits at all scales of existence. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think that in time, unless I spent every minute of the day doing that I'm going to get to that specific place. Now, some of the great mystics and some of the great sages, they locked themselves away in their rooms, and they just spent the time actually working on that. John's doing that now. He's on the boat and he's traveling around teaching and researching and doing those particular things. So, but because we live inside of this construct, the societal construct, with the human aspect of requiring to be able to survive, we have to do something to be able to receive money to live, right? But unless you're a monk and you actually go inside of a cave and etc., and somebody else sponsors you and feed wise, and you go and spend that time to contribute to.
But is that still an attachment to life? So you haven't really collapsed life to the point of where you've fully surrendered?
Well, if you did, you wouldn't be here.
If you collapsed life to the point of full surrender to divinity, you would. Why would you not be here?
Well, Because when you collapse life and you want to relinquish the attachment to life, then you're done. The number one thing that actually keeps people here on this earth from not dying in terms of death, illness, suicide, etc., is a high attachment to life.
Yeah. And that paradoxically, that's also the thing that keeps you in this realm of suffering, right? Of duality.
Ultimately, but
How to get out of that one?
Well, the word suffering is, in terms of Buddhism, is called klesha, and it's about the afflictions of the mind, right? And the source of all human suffering is trying to obtain the unobtainables and avoid the unavoidables. And there's multiple different layers across different religious constructs, theological components, even in physics, it's demonstrated. So that which we try to avoid actually creates our suffering, right? And that's what we consistently trying to obtain creates our suffering. So suffering has a service. And the perception of actually avoiding suffering is, to me, is a misnomer. It is actually a bullshit component of life that has been projected upon us as humans to actually avoid some form of pain. And we could say that we've been conditioned over time to step into avoiding pain and seeking pleasure, which creates the very components of the afflictions of the mind, or the klesha of the mind, to avoid the unavoidables and try and obtain the unobtainables. So then we go full circle back to, like, this is the hidden order, that the moment that we perceive that we're actually in a place of suffering, the way to actually come into an integrated space is to actually see how what it is that you're judging as suffering is serving you.
Mm-hmm.
And how is it providing you a benefit?
Yes.
Yeah.
I need to digest all of this, and I will come back with my rebuttal at another time.
I'm sure you will. And I'm grateful that I love your questions. I really do. And so it will be recorded. So we'll put it up. You can watch it.
Re-listen.
So thank you for that. And sometimes we do tend to go deep, and I really do enjoy these particular things. So this is something that we're actually looking at doing, is actually creating a space that we can philosophize relative to these deeper questions, so that we can expand the consciousness and expand humanity and expand human minds into, let's say, I like the word intellect, like a higher stages of intellect, so that you can receive wisdom. And in that place, there's so much gnosis to be had. And, I'm not going to add any more, like polarizing components to it. And so just keep an ear out for that, because it will be coming shortly. So thank you again, John. And thank you, everybody that is actually online this evening. And I look forward to actually seeing you next week. Thanks, guys.